Hi, I'm Tash. I'm a PhD student in biophysics and I am procrastinating writing my thesis. Maybe like me, over lockdown, you've watched so many Bleach Fails and want to know what exactly is going on in your hair when you put bleach on it. Or maybe also like me, you've been destroying your hair with bleach and other hair dyes over the years and wanted to know what exactly you've been doing to your hair. If you've ever bleached your hair before, you'll know that the bleach comes in two parts. First, we have the developer, which is an oxidizing agent. An oxidizing agent can accept electrons from other molecules. Pigments work by absorbing certain wavelengths of light and reflecting what's left, and that's how we see different colors. For example, this blue, the red and most of the green wavelengths will have been absorbed by a bond, so only the blue part of the spectrum is reflected back into our eyes, and that's why we see it as blue. Oxidizing the pigment breaks the color absorbing bonds, so the full spectrum of light is reflected, which as we know is white. The oxidizing agent in the developer is hydrogen peroxide. Now, on its own, this would react really slowly, like hours and hours and hours. It's also been shown that hydrogen peroxide on its own can't oxidize the hair surface. It needs to be under alkali conditions. An alkaline solution has hydroxide ions in it, that's OH- ions. So hydroxide ions help accelerate the breakdown of hydrogen peroxide and increase the rate of reaction. So that brings us to the second part of hair bleach, which is this kind of powder bleach. And so the most important ingredient in that is something to make the solution alkaline. So in this case it is sodium metasilicate. Right, and the other important thing in here is something called booster powders. These are persulfates. So we've got potassium persulfate, ammonium persulfate, and sodium persulfate. And these are also oxidizing agents, and they work in a complementary fashion with the hydrogen peroxide. Okay, so now I'm going to quickly go over what makes up a hair strand. If you look at diagrams in books, there'll be three main things labelled on there. So you have in the very centre of the hair shaft something called the medulla. Now this isn't found in all types of hair. It's often not in finer hair, it's more prominent in coarse hair. Now surrounding this you have the cortex, and this is where you find most of the keratin fibres. It's a highly proteinous region. It's responsible for most of the tensile mechanical properties of the hair. Then surrounding the cortex you have the cuticle, which is made up of lots of overlapping kind of scale or shingle-like cells. And there's about 6 to 10 layers of those around the hair. And of course, all of these have very complicated substructures. Between the cortex and the cuticle, and between cuticle cells, you'll find something called the cell membrane complex, which sort of acts like a cement between all the different parts of the hair. Now, of course, we have pigment in our hair, which is why we're bleaching it. And this is called melanin. Melanin is found in granules in the cortex, and these are about 0.4 to 1 micrometer in diameter. So a micrometer that's 10 to the minus 6 meters. There are two different types of melanin. You have eumelanin and pheomelanin. I might be pronouncing those wrong. Eumelanin is a black brownish colour, and pheomelanin is a more red pigment. The colour of your hair is determined by the amount of melanin in your hair, the size of the individual granules, and the proportion of the different types of melanin. So, we mix up the bleach, we put it on our hair. Not going to do that right now because my hair is pretty damaged under here and I don't want to waste the bleach, but mix them together. The surface of the hair is naturally hydrophobic, and that means it's repellent to water. So when we put bleach on the hair, it becomes hydrophilic and kind of allows the water in. So on the surface of the hair strand and kind of between the cuticle scales, we have a layer of lipids, and the alkaline hydrogen peroxide solution that we're putting on our hair, this oxidizes the bonds between the lipid layer and the underlying protein, and surfactants within the mixture help remove the layer from the hair strand. Now the molecules in our alkaline hydrogen peroxide mixture can penetrate the hair strand. So how does stuff actually get into the hair? This happens via a process called diffusion. Diffusion is the tendency for molecules to spread out from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration, and that's driven by the random movements of the molecules. Now, there was some debate as to whether the diffusion pathway for molecules getting into the hair was intercellular, so that would be between the cuticle scales, so through the cell membrane complex and the underlying less proteinous side of the cuticle, or whether the pathway was transcellular, so that would be through the cuticle cells. So if this is a cuticle, like through. There was various back and forth over the years as to which way they thought it was. Now, it seems quite established that for large molecules, at least, the main pathway is intercellular diffusion, so through the cell membrane complex and the endocuticle. The low sulfur non-keratinous regions of the hair swell more easily. So in this case, the cell membrane complex and the lower part of the cuticle, which is called the endocuticle, they'll take on more water and swell more than the more highly cross-linked proteinous regions of the cuticle. It's easier for molecules to diffuse through these swollen regions, and also the bleach is oxidizing and degrading the cell membrane complex. So this intercellular diffusion pathway is what you think of when people start talking about your scales lifting for dye to get into your hair. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about diffusion through the cell membrane complex. The molecules that we're looking at in our alkaline hydrogen peroxide mixture are not really very big, so transcellular diffusion is also quite relevant here. As the oxidizing agent is penetrating through the cuticle, it is oxidizing disulfide bond and crosslinks in the more dense proteinous regions at the top of the cuticle, and then it's making it easier for more things to diffuse because there's a less dense network of proteins for the molecules to get through. Once the bleach reaches the cortex, it can now break down the melanin, so it first dissolves the granules and then breaks the colour-absorbing bonds, decolorizing the melanin. As we know, bleach is really damaging to your hair, and that's because it is completely indiscriminate in what it oxidizes. And as well as oxidizing the melanin and decolorizing it, it also oxidizes other bonds. As I talked about briefly, it degrading various parts of the cuticle. The other main oxidation reaction which occurs is with the disulfide bond in cysteine. This is made of amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks which make up proteins. So your DNA codes for amino acids, and then amino acids are joined together, folded up in different ways to make proteins. For example, keratin. Now, when you bleach your hair, it's estimated that you break about 15 to 25% of these disulfide bonds in your hair. And if you were trying to go platinum blonde, you could be breaking up to 45% of these bonds. But this isn't the only damage you're doing. As the bleaching has to occur in a highly alkaline environment, you also get hydrolysis of peptide bonds. Now, peptide bonds are the bonds that join all the amino acids together to make a protein. And these reactions don't take place at the same rate. So you're more likely to get peptide bond breakage, again, if you're trying to go platinum, because you're going to have the solution on your hair for a lot longer. You're probably going to be using a higher volume of peroxide, so a higher concentration of peroxide. And these factors mean that you're more likely to break peptide bonds. Okay, so interestingly, it's been seen that when the number of disulfide bonds in the hair decreases, the wet breaking stress of the hair also decreases. Now, the wet breaking stress is how much stress you can put the hair under before it breaks, and wet because it's wet. So breaking disulfide bonds corresponds to a lower wet breaking stress, but it doesn't seem to have a huge effect on the dry breaking stress of your hair. And this is why your hairdresser will tell you not to brush your wet bleached hair, because it's going to be more fragile in that state. Now, breaking a bunch of peptide bonds, on the other hand, will decrease both the wet and dry breaking stresses of the hair. So it's just going to be more fragile in general. And this is the kind of damage you see when you really, really overdo it, trying to go platinum blonde and everything just starts falling out. Well, that was my deep dive into hair bleaching, and I hope that was interesting. Of course, one can always go deeper, and my main resource for this was a book called The Physical and Chemical Behaviour of Human Hair by Clarence Robbins, which is comprehensive. So if you're interested and can get a copy of it, that's a good place to learn some more. I also went down a whole bunch of side research holes and getting distracted doing this. So I learned about how henna works, how different hair dyes work, how Olaplex worked. There's a great blog about this by, I think, Lab Muffin. I'll link that in the description because I thought that was really interesting. And yeah, I might do some more of these of just kind of communicating what I found when I've gone on a research tangent procrastinating my PhD, just so someone gets some use out of my procrastination. Otherwise, or you might never see me again, so we'll see. Thanks for watching.